pre-launch event for the IBA Student History Society. Part of the event, what we are also launching today, is a beautiful exhibition that CAP has put together for us from their absolutely unique, inimitable archives. It is in the Adamji foyer. There are pictures, there's text, but most importantly, there are original audio clips of eyewitnesses who were present on 23rd March in Lahore in 1940. CAP is lucky. They began work and collecting their oral materials about more than 15 years ago. So they were able to capture memories of a lot of people who are no longer with us. So without further ado, I will introduce our first speaker, who probably has taught most of you, Dr. Jaffar Ahmed, Dean of the Faculty of Social Sciences at Sohail University, that is true, and Director of the Institute of Historical and Social Research, Karachi, also former Director of the Pakistan Studies Center at the University of Karachi. Dr. Jaffar Ahmed has a long and rich academic career in teaching and publishing, and he really is all of our go-to person for Pakistan history. One important theme that we want to address today is the legal frameworks and ramifications around the document that is actually called the Lahore Resolution or the Pakistan Resolution, and Dr. Jaffar will speak to that today.
Thank you very much. I'm thankful to IBA for arranging this program and inviting me to speak about the Lahore Resolution. I'm also happy to know that a group of students have arranged this program, and they are going to launch a society, which is quite encouraging. And if you are going to launch your society with a program around the Lahore Resolution, it's additionally a good message, I would say. As far as the Lahore Resolution is concerned, I think this is one of a major document of our, if you call it, freedom movement. I generally call it a movement of Muslim separatism, which is started in the political sense right in the late 19th century. Lahore Resolution is very important, and students of history should read it carefully. I always ask my students to go for the original documents, and in my classrooms I show the Lahore Resolution and we discuss it sentence by sentence and try to understand what it signifies. So on the one hand, it's a very important document. On the other hand, it's a very misunderstood document. People have tried to make their own judgments about it, to the extent that they, at times, some people say that it was not properly drafted, or there is grammatical mistake in it, so on and so forth. I think it was a very carefully drafted document, and the things which appear apparently as not very clear, they were kept unclear on purpose. A lot of time was spent in its drafting, and the whole night before 22nd of March, the League politicians and legal minds kept on discussing it, and they were taking care of each and every sentence. What would be the response of Punjab Chief Minister Sir Sikandar Hayat? What would be the response of Bengal leadership coming under the leadership of Fazlul Haq, so on and so forth? So I think that it was a very carefully drafted document. So we should give to it equally the attention which it needs. Now, I would say that in order to understand what Lahore Resolution stood for, we should have some background of what was actually happening in India in the constitutional parleys between Muslim League and Congress, and between Muslim League and the colonial regime. To sum it up, I would say that right from the beginning, when Jinnah Sahib entered politics, and soon after when he joined Muslim League in 1913, this was his concern that there some solution should be found for the communal issue of India. Jinnah was not at all communal. He was a westernized liberal person who was influenced by the liberal thinking of the statesmen of the West, and he had seen the operation of the Western institutions, particularly when he was there in England studying law. He had seen the internal dynamics of parliamentary form of government, but when he came back to India, where the representative institutions had started, and another very important thing had started in India, that was periodical censuses that were held, which clearly mentioned the actual size of the Muslims in Indian population. So Jinnah thought that with such minority status, the Muslims would not be in a position to play any significant role in the national politics. So right from the beginning, he kept on giving some one or the other formula to enhance the status of the Muslims. The famous Lucknow Pact was a landmark in that respect, in which he tried to find some solution of the communal divide through political mechanism. That was what he kept on doing in the later years also. In 1927, during the famous Delhi Muslim proposals, he came up with the idea that the Muslims should be given 1/3 representation in the center, even though they were only 24 or 25% of the total population. And the rationale was simply this, that if a component of a nation is way behind the other component, then this minority component should be given some advantage, some additional sort of representation, which in politics is called affirmative action. To my students, I simply give the example of present-day Pakistan's constitution, in which women are allowed to contest elections, and they do contest elections for the general seats, and yet constitution has kept 16% additional seats for women. Why? Because they are, even though they are not minority, they are in fact majority, yet since they are living in a circumstance where it's a men-dominated society, it's very difficult for women to contest elections easily. Therefore, they have been given additional seats in National Assembly and provincial assemblies. This was what Jinnah Sahib was asking for the Muslims of India. Now, all such proposals were turned down, and he kept on giving new proposals. There was a strategy in Jinnah's whole political career. He hardened his position once he was deprived of any positive sign from the other side. So we see that that hardening of the position kept on after the Lucknow Pact. Now, before 1940, what was happening? On the one hand, Jinnah Sahib was trying to find a solution of the communal issue through political management, through arithmetic of politics, so on and so forth. The second important thing was that the whole Indian politics was taking place in the provinces, as David Page has mentioned, that after 1919 Act, whose central part was rejected by Indian leadership and the provincial part was accepted, so the politics in India went to the provinces. So whoever had a say in provincial politics had the right to speak for the future central constitution. So Jinnah Sahib tried to have his some say in the provinces. That's the background in which he signed an agreement with Sikandar Hayat and Fazlullah after 1937 elections. Now, since 1909, it was a sort of arrangement that after every 10 years, a new package would come for constitutional reform. So after 1909, the next package came in the form of Montego-Chelmsford reforms in 1919. After that, another package had to come in 1929, which could not come. And in 1935, the Act of 1935 was introduced by the British government unilaterally. It was accepted, the provincial part was accepted, but again, the central part was not accepted. So the dialogue and constitutional parleys were going on for the central part of the Act. And there, whatever suggestions were being made by Jinnah, they were turned down. And finally, in 1939, when the Congress ministries gave their resignations in the background of the decision of the British government, that war effort was declared without involving the Congress ministries. So there was a political vacuum in which Jinnah decided to make use of this vacuum in order to strengthen his position, further harden his position, and give some solution of the whole issue. Now, Lahore Resolution did four things. First of all, Jinnah for the first time very categorically said, and his 22nd March speech, that is of 2 hours, is a piece of political what should I say, political literature, and all the students of history should read that speech word for word. In that speech, Jinnah for the first time very categorically says that Muslims are not a minority, which means that he is negating his past politics. He is not claiming a better position for the Muslim minority. He says that from the yardstick of international law, Muslims are a nation. Not only that, he says that India is not a country where there are two nations and they are contesting with each other. India is a subcontinent where numerous nations live, and all these nations have the right of self-determination. Now, right of self-determination, the whole notion was already there in air. A League of Nations had been formed in the 1920s. So Jinnah was invoking the right of self-determination for the Muslims of India. So first, he was now departing from his past position. Muslims are no more a minority, they are a nation. Secondly, he says that we are not looking for any reform in the Government of India Act 1935. Like we did that in post-1909 period, we were trying to suggest reforms in the Minto Park reforms. After 1919, we were suggesting reforms in the Montego-Chelmsford reforms. After 1935, we were suggesting reforms in the 1935 Act. But now he says we have lost hope in 1935 Act, put it aside. The other thing he says, which is related to the second point, that now we are not at all interested in the Federation of India. He doesn't mention what he wants now, but he says that federal arrangements as suggested in the past have failed, and we don't see any sort of betterment of the situation by trying to find some federal solution for India. After these major three departures from his previous position, he comes up with the Lahore Resolution, which was put forward the next day on the 23rd of March and was voted on 24th March. Now the resolution is very good, very interesting, in the sense I have mentioned that this has been Jinnah's strategy right from the beginning, that he gives some formula that is rejected, then he gives another formula which is a representative of the further hardening of his position. In 1916, there was Lucknow Pact, very good pact. That didn't work. 1927, he says, come up with another formula, and in every formula he keeps a window of cooperation open. In 1927, he says that, well, make Balochistan a province and frontier a province, separate Sindh from Bombay, give 1/3 representation to the Muslims. Very hardening of the position. But then the window of cooperation is still open, and he says that we are prepared to give up separate electorate. Mind it, Muslim League was formed 20 years earlier for separate electorate. 20 years later, in 1927, he says that if these 4 things are done, we will give up separate electorate. He wants these 4 things because he knows that politics in India had been provincialized, and he wanted to have roots in the provinces, right? Now, that was rejected. So in 1929, he comes up with his famous 14 points, in which he repeats his demands. Make Balochistan a province, Sindh a separate province, and frontier a province, and 1/3 representation to the Muslims, and we will not give up separate electorate. This is hardening of the position. And he says in 14 points that if any other community of India asks for separate electorate, we would support that. Suppose Sikhs say that we want separate electorate, and much later, at one point, a segment of the Sikh community, Hindu community, they had asked for separate electorate. So Jinnah was making his position harden, but he was keeping the doors of dialogue open. The same strategy is found in Lahore Resolution. Lahore Resolution, even though it doesn't use the word confederation, but for anyone who is into political literature and constitutional literature, would say that Lahore Resolution is a resolution for a confederation of India. Confederation, or there is another idea in the political literature that is called zonal federation, a federation within a federation. And this idea was not unknown in Pakistan, because in 1957, when National Awami Party was formed, they had it in their manifesto that they will make Pakistan a zonal federation with 2 zones, East Pakistan and West Pakistan, and East Pakistan or West Pakistan would be a federation within the federation with 4 provinces. So Lahore Resolution comes quite closer to zonal federation. But it was not partition of India. It was not breakup of India. It was the window of cooperation and window of dialogue was still open. And there I will read the most important of the 3 paragraphs of Lahore Resolution. There are 4 paragraphs in this resolution. The paragraph number 3, which to me is the functional paragraph, says that resolved that it is the considered view of this session of All India Muslim League that no constitutional plan would be workable in this country or acceptable to Muslims unless it is designed on the following basic principle, namely that geographically contiguous units are demarcated into regions which should be so constituted with such territorial readjustments as may be necessary that the areas in which the Muslims are numerically in a majority, as in the northwestern and eastern zones of India, should be grouped to constitute independent states in which the constituent units shall be autonomous and sovereign. इंडिया को इस तरह से तकसीम कर दें कि नॉर्थ वेस्ट में एक रीजन बन जाए और नॉर्थ ईस्ट में एक रीजन बन जाए. These will be independent states, and in these independent states, the constituent units like Sindh, Balochistan, Frontier, Punjab, they would be autonomous and sovereign. Now, this is very interesting that these will be demarcated with territorial readjustments. रीएडजस्टमेंट टेरिटोरियल क्यों करना चाह रहे हैं? क्योंकि एक दिन पहले सर सिकंदर हयात बैठे हुए बात कर रहे थे एंड ही वाज सेइंग कि पंजाब की तकसीम नहीं होनी चाहिए, और फजलुल्लाह कह रहे थे कि बंगाल की तकसीम नहीं होनी चाहिए, हम ये एक्सेप्ट नहीं करेंगे. तो उन्होंने वेग रखा और कहा कि टेरिटोरियल रीएडजस्टमेंट किए जाएंगे ताकि पंजाब और बंगाल की जो मुस्लिम मेजॉरिटेरियन पोजीशन है वो इंटैक्ट रहे, वो डिस्टर्ब ना हो। और इसका एक और रीज़न भी था जो बाद में सामने आया कि लियाकत अली खान वांटेड दिस फ्रेज टू बी पुट इन द रेजोल्यूशन because he thought, and quite I would say simple or naive he was, he believed that if this phrase of territorial readjustment would be there in the resolution, at a later day we will claim Delhi to be part of this Muslim majority independent state in the northwest, जो कि ज़ाहिर नहीं हो सकता था anyway. So ये लेकिन द मोस्ट इम्पॉर्टेंट थिंग जिसकी तरफ मैं आपकी तवज्जो दिलाना चाहूँगा, ये पूरा नक्शा बयान कर रहे हैं कि इंडिया को इस तरह से एडजस्टमेंट्स करें कि नॉर्थ वेस्ट में एक मुस्लिम स्टेट बन जाए, नॉर्थ ईस्ट में एक मुस्लिम स्टेट बन जाए, उनके अंदर ऑटोनमस और सॉवरेन यूनिट्स होंगे, सो ऑन एंड सो फॉर्थ। मैंने कहा कि बट स्टिल दिस इज़ नॉट रेसिपी और अ सोल्यूशन और समथिंग फार्मूला फॉर द पार्टीशन ऑफ इंडिया, जो हम लोग सेलिब्रेट करते वक्त खुश हो रहे होते हैं कि इस दिन पाकिस्तान बन गया था। ऐसा नहीं है, क्योंकि जो पैराग्राफ मैंने आपको सामने पढ़ा, इट स्टार्ट्स विद दीज वर्ड्स दैट रिजॉल्व्ड that it is the considered view of this session of All India Muslim League that no constitutional plan would be workable in this country. किस कंट्री की बात कर रहे हैं 1940 में, और किस कंट्री के लिए एक वर्केबल कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन चाह रहे हैं? कॉन्स्टिट्यूशंस आर मेड टू मेक कंट्रीज यूनाइटेड। नेवर इन द हिस्ट्री ऑफ द वर्ल्ड अ कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन वाज मेड टू डिवाइड अ कंट्री। सो द लाहौर रेजोल्यूशन इज a solution for the unity of India, but a departure from the federal arrangement for which Muslim League had been striving in the past. अब एक confederal arrangement बता रहे हैं, इस zonal federation इसे आप कह लें, confederation कह लें, but इंडिया को तोड़ने की बात नहीं कर रहे, constitution की बात कर रहे हैं, उसकी workability की बात कर रहे हैं। Now this is the background of Lahore Resolution. अब बाद का जो डेवलपमेंट है वो किस तरह से हुआ, इट्स अनदर स्टोरी। वी केम क्लोजर टू लाहौर रेजोल्यूशन इन 1946 when cabinet mission plan came and gave the idea of 3 zones, zone A, B and C, which was quite close to what Lahore Resolution had said. This was accepted by Jinnah. So up until 1946 he was still thinking in terms of finding some solution of the communal issue of India within the framework of United India. When the cabinet mission plan was rejected by Congress, then Jinnah was left with no option. He realized that he has been marginalized and his legal arguments did not work. So he thought that, well, if that is the solution imposed on us, we would accept it. So this is what my interpretation of Lahore Resolution is. I will be pleased to take your questions on that. Thank you.
We're going to move on to our next speaker, Aaliyah Tayyebi. She's a senior project manager at the Citizens Archive of Pakistan. She's responsible for putting this event together and for the exhibition in the Adamji foyer. She has worked on documenting first-hand accounts of partition and the formative years of Pakistan, and has been using oral histories as a tool to educate, engage, and understand South Asian history. So without further ado, Aliya will talk to us about the subject at hand and her work at CAP.
Okay, so Dr. Jaffar spoke to us about the literature that is focused around partition, shed a lot of light on the Pakistan Resolution and what it means. I look at history from a slightly different lens. I look at history as not just high politics, but as a holistic angle of representing a people, a land. And I focus on the orality of history, what it meant to the people who were experiencing it, and how have they collected these memories in their minds and share it with us. So the Oral History Project at CAP started in the year 2007. At that time, a large number of people who were a witness to the 1940 Lahore Resolution and then 1947 partition of Pakistan were alive and well at that time. And we reached into these resources to understand what it meant to be a part of these events, because we had been studying about it in our history books. And the question that we had was very simple, that the history that we were hearing was very different from the history that we were reading. And we realized that there was a gap here that needed to be filled. And I say this because as a person immersed in my elder stories, I would sit down with my grandmother and hear her talk to me about partition and what it was to be a citizen of the land at that time, what it meant to be part of United India, what it meant to be a part of a newly born Pakistan. And these stories and these recollections had a very profound effect on me as a person growing up. I did not actively understand these stories and what they meant to me as a child, but I remember as I grew up and I was trying to understand who I was or what I could become, these stories actually made me realize that I needed to work with this. And I needed to not just work with it for myself, but I needed to work with it for us as people of this land. Dr. Jaffar spoke about a word which I have been trying to make peace with, and that is nation. When we reflect on this word, a Muslim nation, a separate nation, we look at the word nation in itself as a 21st century phenomenon. We understand it with our sensibilities of today. But I feel if we are to truly do justice to what it meant in 1940, then we have to take this word back in time, look at it in reflection of what it was then, because language is not stagnant, it evolves. One can truly look at the literature that is available of history, but if we were to make sense of those words, then we would have to sit with people who were a part of this literature being put together and documented. We must listen to the people who not only framed these constitutions or these amendments or these resolutions, but the people who actually experienced it as a phenomenon growing in this land. Lahore Resolution is not just a resolution that paved the way for Pakistan per se. It is also a document or an idea that was shared with the people gathered at the Minto Park on the 22nd of March in 1940. And these people then went forward and shared that message. It's like a ripple effect of a very interesting proportion. And it is when this is translated from that stage to the people and then the people to other people that it becomes a movement. And it is translated and you can see the fruit that it is bearing when the elections of 45-46 take place. And the Muslim and the All India Muslim League suddenly becomes like this very prominent voice. And when Mr. Jinnah claims that he is the voice of the Muslims, he has the electorate behind him to substantiate that claim. So I feel that if we truly want to understand history, it is not only the high politics that needs to be reflected, but it is the stories of the people that must be put into as much credence in our consumption of history as literature is. And on that note, I'd like to share two of our very beautiful and poignant stories of people who witnessed these events. The first story that I like to present to you is of a gentleman by the name of Muhammad Yaqub Khan. He was born in 1926 in Charsadda, and he was at Minto Park as a citizen, as a young boy who was extremely motivated by what was happening around him and wanted to be a part of history. So this is how he recollects 22nd March 1940.
करारदाद पाकिस्तान के वक्त हमने तो जो कुछ देखा है, मैं और मेरा छोटा भाई रियाज, हम दो जिंदा हैं जो कायद-ए-आज़म के साथ स्टेज पे बैठे थे, और कोई भी नहीं, मेरा यकीन नहीं है कि कोई इस तरह कोई जिंदा आदमी होगा कि जो कायद-ए-आज़म के साथ स्टेज पे बैठा हो। और बहुत बड़ा जलसा हुआ था, इतना बड़ा जलसा हुआ था, ख़ास कर कायद-ए-आज़म को रिसीव करने जो लाहौर रेलवे स्टेशन पर जो प्रोसेशन था और जो वो था वो मैं बता नहीं सकता किस किस्म का वो था। और फिर कई मरतबा फिर जब पाकिस्तान रेजोल्यूशन मूव हुआ और ये तो बस फिर लोग तो खुशियों से वो हो रहे थे, बहुत ज़्यादा वो खुश थे। कायद-ए-आज़म ने करारदाद पाकिस्तान के दरमियान एक बात जो मुझे अब अच्छी तरह से याद है, वो तो मुसलमानों के वो तो जनरल वो थे, मेरी तो उम्र उस वक़्त 13 साल की, लेकिन जो बात उसने उनकी मुझे याद है तो उसने एक बात की थी कि इफ़ मनी इज़ लास्ट समथिंग इज़ लास्ट, इफ़ ऑनर इज़ लास्ट ग्रेट इज़ लास्ट, बट इफ़ करेज इज़ लास्ट ऑल इज़ लास्ट। ये कायद-ए-आज़म की वो थी जो हमने फिर इसको वो किया। और ये मेरे ख्याल में अभी तक किसी को ये पता नहीं है कि क्या क्या कायद-ए-आज़म ने जो कुछ वो किया था, तो ये आजकल के ज़माने के तो कुछ और वो है, सब अपने उसके लिए लड़ रहे हैं, अपने मतलब के लिए लड़ रहे हैं और तभी तो हमने अपने आप को किनारा कश किया कि ये भाई ये तो वो पाकिस्तान नहीं है जो कायद-ए-आज़म मांगता था, ये तो अभी खिलौना बन गया है, लोगों के हाथों खिलौना बन गया है और खेलते रहते हैं इससे, जो कि अल्लाह ताला ने इनको ये खुदादाद पाकिस्तान का तोहफा दिया था। अब ये उसके जो चलाने वाले हैं ये सारे गपलाक हुए।
I hope you enjoy that story and you can engage with it more when you go and look at the exhibition and listen to many other stories like this that is in the foyer. Okay, so the second story that I'd like to share with you is of this gentleman by the name of Shamsud Zoha. He was born in Bihar Sharif in 1925. He was part of the students' movement for the All India Muslim League. And this is what he had to say of what he had witnessed in 1940.
'38 का पटना का सेशन हमने देखा, इसमें जिन्ना साहब तशरीफ लाए। 1940 का वो इजलास जो कहलाता है पाकिस्तान रेजोल्यूशन वगैरह, उस जलसे में 17 आदमी हम लोग अलीगढ़ से मुस्लिम नेशनल गार्ड में गए थे। मैं इंटर में सेकंड ईयर में पढ़ता था। मेरे भाई ने कहा कि तुम इम्तहान होने वाला है, तुम जा रहे हो। हमने कहा 5 दिन की लाहौर की सैर फ्री, हम तो जा रहे हैं भाई। उस जलसे में बेटा न इस्लाम जिंदाबाद का नारा था, न कायद-ए-आज़म जिंदाबाद का नारा था, न पाकिस्तान जिंदाबाद का नारा था। 3 नारे थे, मुस्लिम लीग जिंदाबाद, मिस्टर जिन्ना जिंदाबाद और शेर बंगाल फजल हक, ये 3 नारा था। अब यहाँ बैठ के मैंने एक साहब से पूछा कि आप जो ये से 23 मार्च के इसको कहते हैं पाकिस्तान रेजोल्यूशन, एक वेग सा एक रेजोल्यूशन फजल हक साहब लाए कि जहाँ हम लोगों की मुसलमानों की अक्सरियत है। 1935 इंडिया एक्ट, जिससे आज भी तुम्हारा मुल्क गवर्न हो रहा, अंग्रेज़ों ने बनाया। और उसमें जो इलेक्शन में कांग्रेस आई और उसने जो धूम मचाई राम राज की उस तरीके से, तो इस खौफ से कि ये जो मॉडर्न डेमोक्रेसी थी तो हैंड रेजिंग में 14% कहाँ रहती है, ये खौफ जो है वो तो मुसलमानों को दिल में होता है ना भाई। ये तो अभी भी मेरे पास एक किताब थी रखी हुई कि नहीं मसीह तलवार की, जिसमें कहा कि जना से कोई ताल्लुक़ नहीं पाकिस्तान का। जना तो आखिर वक्त में ये कह रहा था कि सेंटर में हमको प्योरिटी दे दो, बकिया प्रोविंस में जो ही चाहे को। तो उस पर गांधी ने कहा कि 14% आदमी जो हैं वो बराबर हो जाएंगे उनके, ये कैसे हो सकता है। तो उसमें पटेल और नेहरू को है जो है, नेहरू की पहली किताब जो डिस्कवरी ऑफ इंडिया है उसमें उसने पाकिस्तान के खिलाफ ही, सेकेंड एडिशन में खुद कहता है कि पार्टीशन वाज ए हिस्टोरिकल नेसेसिटी।
So these were just two of the stories that give us a witness account of 1940. And it was very interesting as I was observing all of you, listening to these stories, I could understand that you were trying to immerse yourself in these stories. And that is the beauty of orality of history. When you listen to someone's voice and they are going back in time, their voice has the power to take you back in time with them. So when we go and speak to people about partition and the formative years of Pakistan, it is often time that their drawing rooms become this window into our past. And I personally feel very strongly about students engaging with this form of history as part of their understanding of history and not just focus on a single lens when the world can be opened to them. So we also have some photographs that I'd like to share on screen, and I'd like to give you a glimpse into what those photographs mean. Before we get to the photographs, I think it's really important to speak about the process of documentation. So like I said, we record oral histories and we speak, and we tap into people who might have any kind of visual documentation, which includes photographs, newspaper clippings, letters, matchboxes, stamps, railway tickets, ration cards, etc., etc. The photographs that I'm going to be sharing with you are from this gentleman called F.E. Chaudhary, who was popularly known as Chacha Ji. He was a photojournalist and one of the most prominent local photographers who captured the political and social landscape of South Asia at that time. The first photograph that we see is a photograph of the 22nd March Jalsa at Minto Park. Chaudhry Khaliquzzaman is addressing the crowd gathered there. Right behind him, we see Qaid-e-Azam Muhammad Ali Jinnah and Liaquat Ali Khan writing something on the desk, probably preparing their speech. But what I want you all to also notice is that there is a banner that can be very clearly seen. And on this banner is a verse that is written. And that verse is from Iqbal's poem called Tulu-e-Islam. And the verse reads, जहाँ में अहले ईमान सूरत खुर्शीद जीते हैं, इधर डूबे उधर निकले, उधर डूबे इधर निकले. Now, when we talk about what Lahore Resolution means as paving the way for Pakistan, I think it is very important to understand that, like I said in the beginning, it's not just about the high politics. It's about how the high politics trickles down and forms a movement which makes things happen. And it is by looking at these photographs from a very personal narrative of understanding the different aspects of history that exist that we are able to actually visually represent what could be one of the many takes of history. Now, if we move to the second photograph. Okay, so I'm going to quickly run them through you. And again, like I said, you can engage with these photographs at the exhibition which is outside. The second photograph is a photograph of Qaid-e-Azam Muhammad Ali Jinnah, Liaquat Ali Khan, and Nawab of Mamdod. And the thing that I want you all to look at is the two guards who are standing right next to them. One of them is the All India Muslim League National Guard, and the other is the guard that is part of the British government. And there are these differences which often tell us the many facets that exist in our history. Moving on to the third image. This is the image of Amjadi Bano, who was the wife of Maulana Muhammad Ali Jauhar. She was the only woman in the working committee, and she was part of the speakers at the event. Not only that, but she also represented the Lahore Resolution, as we know, to the Women's Committee on the 23rd March at Islamia College in Lahore. If we move to the image right after, this is a group photograph of the All India Muslim League Working Committee. This photograph was taken at Bashir Ahmed's residence, where the meeting was held. He was a very prominent Muslim leaguer and a supporter of the cause. The last photograph is a photograph of Qaid-e-Azam Muhammad Ali Jinnah at the Badshahi Masjid. I wanted to share this photograph because this photograph is a photograph from 1936 when he visited Lahore. There is a massive difference that you can see in Jinnah's dressing, in the crowds that are around him, and it is often by reflecting on these multifaceted angles of our recorded history, of our political history, of our visual history, that we can come and form a much holistic idea. So the reason that we are here is to tell you that there are many ways of looking at history, and orality is one of them.
Now, as we wrap up, we'll have more time for Q&A, and we have roped in Dr. Zaidi today to engage with both the speakers and what they have spoken of, give some tough comments and ask some questions.
Thank you very much, Aliya. Thank you, students of the IBA, for taking the initiative to do this, and thank you, Citizens Archive of Pakistan. Citizens Archive of Pakistan एक बहुत अहम रिसोर्स है हमारे लिए, सबके लिए. IBA के बहुत सारे स्टूडेंट्स भी जाते हैं वहाँ पे, इंटर्नशिप्स करते हैं. कुछ हमारी जो स्टूडेंट्स ग्रेजुएट होते हैं वो भी जाके ज्वाइन करते हैं. तो आपको और बहुत पूरी दुनिया में सिटीजन्स आर्काइव ऑफ पाकिस्तान का जिक्र किया जाता है, क्योंकि वो मवाद जमा करते हैं और ये सारी चीज़ें करते हैं और रखते हैं, और बहुत अच्छी रिसोर्स है. अच्छा, आप लोगों ने पता नहीं गौर किया या नहीं किया, जो डिस्कशन हो रहा था यहाँ पे, उसमें एक जो इस तरह या नाम इस्तेमाल किया गया, वो लाहौर रेजोल्यूशन की बात की गई. और ये बहुत अहम है कि ये पाकिस्तान रेजोल्यूशन नहीं है, ये लाहौर रेजोल्यूशन है. और आम तौर पे आप में से कुछ लोग शायद गलती से हिस्ट्री पढ़ लें आगे जाके, तो ये चीज़ें बहुत अहम होती हैं समझने के लिए कि हम उसको लाहौर रेजोल्यूशन कहें या पाकिस्तान रेजोल्यूशन कहें. ये 1940 में लाहौर रेजोल्यूशन था, जैसे लोगों ने कहा. फिर ये अयूब खान के दौर में उन्होंने पाकिस्तान एंड लाहौर रेजोल्यूशन करने लग गए, और फिर हमें पता है कि लाहौर जो है वो पाकिस्तान बन गया, तो अब वो पाकिस्तान अभी तक है. तो ये जो तब्दीली आई है, ये बहुत अहम चीज़ होती है इन छोटी छोटी इन सिम्बल्स को देखने में, दैट इट इज़ एक्चुअली द लाहौर रेजोल्यूशन ऑफ 23rd March 1940. And how a Lahore resolution transforms into a military parade yesterday in Islamabad. That's also very interesting. So, you know, how history changes, how it is transformed, how it is captured, how it is distorted. And all I saw yesterday on television was lots of brigadiers and brigades and, you know, people looking at the sky कि बारिश होगी कि नहीं होगी, पता नहीं क्या क्या देख रहे थे. और वो एक के बाद एक तोप जा रहा है, और ये 23 मार्च है. अब आप खुद सोचें, 1940 23 मार्च और 23 مارچ 2022 میں کتنی تبدیلی آ گئی ہے, اور یہ ایک بہت اہم چیز ہے. اگر ہم ہسٹورینس ہیں یا ہسٹری پڑھنا چاہتے ہیں تو ایک یہ پہلو ہے جس پہ میرے خیال ہے تھوڑا سا غور کرنا چاہیے. اچھا, ایک اور چیز ہے جو ایک بہت یعنی آج کل کے دور میں آپ تصور بھی نہیں کر سکتے. جیسے ڈاکٹر جعفر احمد نے ایک بات کی ڈاکیومنٹ کی, وہ کہہ رہے ان کی بات بالکل صحیح ہے کہ بہت اہم ڈاکیومنٹ ہے. اس کے بعد بھی ہمارے پاس 1973 کا ایک چھوٹا سا ڈاکیومنٹ ہے جس کو کچھ لوگ کہتے ہیں 14 پیج کا ردی کا وہ ڈاکیومنٹ ہے. وہ اتنا اہم ڈاکیومنٹ ہے, اس میں ایسی چیزیں لکھی ہیں. تو ایک سوال یہ ہوتا ہے کہ ڈاکیومنٹ کی اہمیت کیا ہوتی ہے, کہ واٹ ڈز ون میک آف اے ڈاکیومنٹ. کیا ایک کتاب یا ڈاکیومنٹ آپ دیکھیں اس پر عمل کتنا ہوتا ہے. اس پہ 1940 کا جو ڈاکیومنٹ تھا اس میں کوئی شک نہیں بہت اہم ڈاکیومنٹ ہے. اور اس طرح 1973 کا بھی ایک مسودہ ہے, شاید آئین کہتے ہیں اسے, وہ اس کی اہمیت بہت زیادہ ہے. لیکن اس پر عمل کتنا ہوتا ہے, کہ آرٹیکل 6 ایک بہت اہم ہے, آج کل گردش میں بھی ہے, لوگ بات بھی کر رہے ہیں. تو یہ ڈاکیومنٹس کی کیا حیثیت ہوتی ہے ایز ہسٹورینس. میرا جو کام ہے وہ میں یہی دیکھتا ہوں کہ جو چیزیں لکھی گئیں, جو چھپیں, ان کو کس طرح پڑھا جائے, ان پر کس طرح اس کا تجزیہ کس طرح کیا جائے. تو یہ دو چیزیں آ جاتی ہیں. اور اچھا, اور ایک حیرت انگیز بات یہ ہے کہ 1940 کا لاہور ریزولوشن لکھنے والا جو شخص تھا جس نے لکھا, اس کا آج آپ نام بھی نہیں لے سکتے. اور جس جہاں سے وہ جو ان کا رشتہ بنتا ہے, جو ان کا تعلق ہے, وہ تو بالکل آپ 1974 کے بعد پاکستان میں وہ حرام ہو گیا کہنا. ان کا نام تھا ظفر اللہ خان. ٹھیک ہے, تو اب وہ انہوں نے یہ ڈاکیومنٹ وغیرہ لکھا تھا اور ان کا بہت بڑا کنٹریبیوشن تھا. تو یہ اگر ہم تاریخ دیکھیں 23 مارچ 1940 کے حوالے سے وہ ڈاکیومنٹ دیکھیں تو اس میں سے اتنی ساری چیزیں نکل کے آتی ہیں. جسٹ اے سمپل پیس آف پیپر اور ڈاکیومنٹ وچ واز سائنڈ, اگریڈ, ڈسکسڈ فار 2-3 days, which transformed South Asia. There's no question about that. But how do we look at those documents? How do we understand the sort of the pretext, the context, the post-text? These are words from Shahab Ahmed's fantastic book called What is Islam, which I recommend to all my students. What is the nature of a document? How is it made? And then there is also this very interesting word in the document called homeland. Homeland kya hota hai? Homeland is not an independent country. Or is it an independent country? یہ پوری پاکستان کی تاریخ اگلے 7 سال سے 23 مارچ سے لے کے کم از کم میرا خیال ہے کہ اپریل مئی 1947 تک 7 سال تک یہی بحث ہوتی ہے کہ ہوم لینڈ کا مطلب کیا ہے. ابھی ڈاکٹر جعفر نے بھی بات کی, انڈیپینڈنٹ اسٹیٹس کی بات کی, تقسیم کی بات کی. اب یہ بہت ایک اہم بحث ہے کہ جو مسودہ ہے, the Pakistan Resolution talks about the term it uses is homeland. And homeland today we would say is independent state or independent country. Is a state independent? Okay, that's a very interesting question. Our country is independent. That's even a more interesting question these days. But anyway, let's put that aside. So this question of what is a homeland and how does one interpret that term? This is again, you look at a document, a simple document. How does one read a script? How does one look at a document? How does one analyze it? So the notion of a homeland, if anybody has ever taken my class, been unfortunate to take my history class, you would know that I talk about this notion of whether, how was Pakistan created? Was Mr. Jinnah looking for an independent country called Pakistan, which we had and lost, which is another thing I'll come to, and whether this homeland was sort of safeguarding Muslim interests in a united India with a structure which allowed states autonomy. These are very interesting terms. So جب اگر ہم 1940 کا وہ کی دستاویز پڑھیں تو اس میں ہوم لینڈ کا جو لفظ آتا ہے وہ بہت دلچسپ ہوتا ہے. اچھا, چوتھا, اور میرے پاس 5 پوائنٹس ہے. اگلا پوائنٹ جو ہے یہ بڑے مزے کی بات ہے. وہ 4 سدہ کے جو صاحب تھے جو ابھی بات کر رہے تھے, انہوں نے کہا کہ بہت زبردست قسم کا جلسہ تھا, کل پرسوں بھی ہونے والا ہے, وہ بہت زبردست قسم کا جلسہ تھا. تو انہوں نے کہا کہ جناح صاحب کی تقریر لوگ سن رہے تھے. اب مزے کی بات ہے, جناح صاحب کو تو اردو آتی نہیں تھی, پنجابی تو خیر دور کی بات ہے, ان کو اردو نہیں آتی تھی, وہ انگریزی میں بول رہے تھے. تو اب مثال جیسے آپ نے بات کی कि इसमें ये भी एक बहुत मज़े की बात हो जाती है। और उस वक्त जो है ना इंटरनेट, ज़ाहिर है कोई एक ज़्यादा से ज़्यादा एक वो होगा, एक लाउड स्पीकर कहीं लगा होगा, और अगर वाकई अजीम व शान जलसा था, जैसे वो जो दो लोग वहाँ पे थे, चारसदा के जो एक साहब थे और उनके भाई जो आए थे, तो ये, और वो कहते शायद, उन्होंने कहा था शायद वो स्टेज पे बैठे थे, चलो उनको तो आवाज़ आ गई थी, लेकिन वो जो चार रो पीछे बैठा था, तो वो उसने कितना सुना, उसको कुछ सुना भी अंग्रेज़ी, पहले बात तो अंग्रेज़ी, ठीक है, आम लोग आए हुए थे। आप खुद सोचें अगर इमरान खान 27 तारीख को अंग्रेज़ी में बोलने लग जाएं तो क्या होगा। तो ये आप सोचें जिन्ना साहब जो गालिबन अंग्रेज़ी में बोल रहे थे, तो ये एक सवाल आता है कि इट्स वेरी इंपॉर्टेंट जो आपने बात की कि यू नो दिस सेंटिमेंट दैट इज कॉज, वो जो बिहार शरीफ से आए थे या जहाँ से वो आए थे, वो भी ये बात कर रहे थे, शायद पटना से आए थे, वो भी ये बात कर रहे थे कि एक माहौल पैदा हो जाता है, एक सेंटिमेंट पैदा हो जाता है। तो इट्स नॉट इम्पॉर्टेंट व्हाट्स बीइंग सेड, nobody is listening, nobody cares. It's that you are there at a key moment, and as you said that how movements are created, how a sense of क्या कहते हैं, identity, a sense of meaning, a sense of sharing, a sense of bonding, how all that is created. I think that becomes very very central to this Minto Park वाला था। आखिरी बात जो है, जो डॉक्टर जाफर ने की, बहुत मज़े की बात की कि जिन्ना साहब ने 22 तारीख को एक बहुत अहम जुमला कहा था, The right of self-determination for nations. काश 1970 में भी वो बात हम मान लेते। Thank you.
Our last speaker is SSLA faculty, probably familiar to all of you, Dr. Newal Osman. She has a PhD from Cambridge University in South Asian history and a particular expertise in the history of colonial Punjab. Is Dr. Newal online?
Yes, I am.
Great. Over to you.
So I would like to start off by making two sort of generalized comments or observations before discussing some of the specific events in the run-up to the passing of the resolution. I think the first general comment that I would like to make relates to the location where the resolution was passed, which was the Punjab, and the location is interesting for a couple of reasons. Firstly, the reason that Punjab is important is because it is one of the two largest Muslim majority provinces other than Bengal, and this is important because Jinnah understands that he has to carry the Punjab with him if he is to lobby at the center and to convince the British that he is speaking for the Muslims of all of India. So in that context, I think Punjab being one of the two largest Muslim majority provinces is particularly important. The other thing is that Punjab is a bit of a mixed plate, and we have to acknowledge the fact that Punjab is a bit of a mixed plate. What does that mean? That means that Punjab is a bare Muslim majority province. It has about a 54% Muslim majority, which is just over half. And other than that, it is home to many different sort of diverging ideological inclinations. So you see the Punjab being home to some of the most sort of anti-imperialist and even communist, left-leaning, revolutionary elements coming out of India, as recent works have shown. This includes the Ghadar party, but also several prominent communists. At the same time, it is, as you can see in the passing of this resolution, it is now also the location where one of sort of the resolutions which is considered to be a defining moment in Muslim nationalism, at least the Muslims in the subcontinent, is being passed. But more than being either of these two things, more than being the seat of Muslim nationalism, which it is not in fact, or being sort of the seat of leftists, which it is to an extent perhaps, what the Punjab is a loyalist province par excellence. It is the blue-eyed boy of the British. The Punjab is the favoured province of the British to the extent that the particular style of governance that is practiced by the British in the Punjab has a peculiar name of its own, which is the Punjab School of Administration. And that is a style of indirect administration by the British, which has proven highly successful. It is a style which is considered sort of exemplary, and therefore Punjab is considered to be a success story as far as British administration is concerned and cooperation with the provincial elite is concerned. So in a way it is very self-contradictory, it is very curious that this province also becomes home to this, sort of defining piece of legislation, which we now retrospectively consider to be the moment in Muslim nationalism in the subcontinent. And I think that the second general comment that I would like to make, or the second observation that one must make at the outset, is to acknowledge the fact that, when we teach or we study history, especially at the school level, but to an extent also at higher levels, we tend to pick out sort of certain events, which led up to sort of to nationhood. And we study them in a sort of decontextualized and an isolated manner. And in doing so, we sort of overlook the fact that at the point that that resolution was passed or the legislation was passed, things were much more tentative. There were plenty of federal schemes, there were plenty of schemes for the future of India, for what the centre would constitute in India once India had gained independence, or even under the British, while it remained under the British. There were several schemes that were passed by several politically prominent people. There were also schemes which were passed by people who were not politically prominent, and of all religions. And if we focus sort of only on a few of them, which did result, in something concrete, even if the importance is accorded to them retrospectively, then we miss out or overlook the fact that things were very tentative, and they could have moved in any particular direction. They didn't have to move in this particular direction. So that's the other thing that I wanted to sort of point out. To not approach history in such a deterministic manner or in such a presentist manner. So I think with that now, I would like to move towards sort of some more specific, a discussion of some of the specific events in the run-up to the Muslim League conference in Lahore in March. So the ministry that was in charge in the Punjab at the time was a unionist ministry, which is to say that the party which was in power in Punjab after the elections of 1937 was a party of landlords and agriculturists, which was called the Unionist Party. And the Unionist Party was a cross-communal party. It had Muslims and Hindus and Sikhs. And there was a pact in place. There was a pact between the Muslims of the Unionist Party under the leadership of Sikandar Hayat Khan, who was the Chief Minister of Punjab. Between Sikandar and Jinnah, there was a pact which was called the Sikandar-Jinnah Pact. And according to that pact, all the Muslims of the Unionist Party were also members of the Muslim League. But this was a relationship that was a very tense and stressed out relationship. This was not a very easy relationship, which challenges the general narrative that sort of Jinnah carried all the Muslims with him at the time of the resolution or before it or after it. There was nothing of that sort. It was a rather tense situation. So one of the interesting things to focus on when you talk about the run-up to the passing of the resolution was the state of affairs in Lahore itself. And there was a politically sort of slightly unstable situation in Lahore at the time that the Muslim League conference took place. In that, there was a movement called the Khaksars. The Khaksars were basically an anti-imperialist, anti-British movement under the leadership of Inayatullah Mashriqi. And so the government had, because this party, this movement was indulging in anti-British propaganda and anti-British activities, the Punjab government had placed a ban on their meetings and their activities and demonstrations. And in contravention of that ban, Inayatullah Mashriqi decided to hold a demonstration on the 18th of March, so just a few days earlier. The Punjab police opened fire, and what resulted was an incident which was obviously smaller in scale but slightly reminiscent of the Jallianwala Bagh incident of 1919. The police opened fire, there were several casualties, several injuries, and this alienated a large section of Punjabi society against the government, against the Punjab government, the local government. And In particular, obviously, the Muslims of Punjab were ruffled. Even those who did not sympathize with the Inayatullah Mashriqi under normal circumstances, what one would call the moderate Muslims, or even the liberal Muslims, or even the loyalist Muslims. This alienated quite a few of them, more than Sikandar and his ministry could afford. And so one of the things that happened in the run-up to the Muslim League conference, just a few days prior to it, was that the anti-Punjab government sentiments were running very high in Lahore at the time. So when Jinnah, especially amongst the Muslims, of course, because it was their co-religionists who had been shot. So when Jinnah arrives in Lahore on the 21st of March, he is greeted by a whole lot of Muslims, common men, the common Punjabi population, at the railway station, chanting slogans of Sikandar Murdabad, Sikandar being the chief minister of the Punjab. So this is a situation which puts the Punjab ministry and the Punjab chief minister and also the Punjab police, the Punjab governor, on a back foot as far as Jinnah is concerned, because the appearance is that Jinnah is going to be somehow the ultimate arbiter in what is considered to be a strictly provincial issue. And in fact, in the run-up to the Muslim League conference, Sikandar actually tries to have the conference postponed or shifted to another location. He tries in 3 or 4 different ways, through 3 or 4 different individuals, by sending messages to Jinnah to either change the location of the conference to another province or to have it postponed. Because he is so stressed about the image that is going to cause of the ability of the Punjab government, and also because that is how great his mistrust is of Jinnah, that Jinnah is probably going to exploit the situation for his benefit, to his benefit. So this is just by way of shedding light onto the general concept that we have that at this point Jinnah carried all the Muslims with him, especially the Muslims of the Muslim majority provinces being more important, Punjab and Bengal being more important at this point. This was not the case. The relationship with Sikandar Hayat, as was the relationship with Fazlul Haq of Bengal, was a highly tense, highly stressed relationship with Jinnah. It was by no means an easy relationship, and it was by no means a simple relationship. So that's the first thing I wanted to highlight. The second thing I wanted to highlight with regard to Sikandar, which is interesting and perhaps unfortunate for him as well, is that Sikandar is unwillingly, unwittingly and inadvertently considered to be one of the authors of the Lahore Resolution. And I say unwillingly and inadvertently because the idea is that Sikandar had submitted a proposal for the future of India, for the future of the center of what the center would constitute in India in the future. And this proposal was not taken very seriously by the British. He first submitted it to the British, and then a slightly altered version of it was submitted to the Muslim League. The idea is that the Muslim League worked on this draft. They changed it substantially. And this is what was then presented as the Lahore Resolution. It was ultimately passed by the Muslim League. And what it came to represent was vastly different from what Sikandar had intended it to be. As we've already discussed, Punjab was not very fertile ground for Muslim nationalist sentiments, and therefore not very fertile ground for a Muslim separatist movement, at least not at this stage, not in the 1930s or early 1940s. And so just a brief discussion of what Sikandar's scheme actually entailed. Sikandar's scheme was more along the lines of the cabinet mission plan. It divided India into 7 zones, and each zone would then have units, the units approximating provinces, and the zones were equal in terms of population. There would be a central government. The central government would be very, very restricted in power. That is to say that even if the Congress was to win at the central level, because the Congress had won most of the provinces in the 1937 election, and so if there was going to be an independent center with Indians ruling the central government, then the Congress would probably be dominating it. So which is why in Sikandar's scheme, the center actually has very few, very restricted powers. And then there's this sort of zonal administration, which is that the Muslim majority provinces in the northwest form one zone, the Muslim majority provinces towards the the east form one zone, and then there are several other zones which are mostly Hindu majority. And within the zones then there are units or provinces. And this sort of scheme that he submitted, one of the interesting things about this scheme is that it proposes a system of indirect election for the zonal legislature and the central legislature, which is to say that only the unit legislature is going to be popularly elected, then the unit level legislature is going to decide who's going to be in the zonal legislature, and then the zonal legislature will decide who's going to be in the central legislature, which basically means that individuals and parties which don't have a strong standing in any of the provinces, which is the case with the Muslim League at this point. The Muslim League has not actually done well in the election of 1937 from any of the provinces. And so such parties would not have a say at the center either. So his proposal actually works to the disadvantage of the Muslim League, which again shows Sikandar's sort of true inclinations towards the Muslim League or towards Jinnah. And also, of course, this is something that has been covered in historiography. The provinces, the Muslim majority provinces at this point, have a very strong sense of provincialism. What has been called in historiography as particularisms, provincial particularisms. So this federal scheme is slightly tweaked by Sikandar, submitted to the Muslim League working committee in February, and it is further tweaked by the Muslim League working committee and presented as the resolution of 1940. And by the time it is passed, it has been considerably changed into something which bears very little resemblance to what Sikandar had originally intended. The main difference coming from the fact that what Sikandar intended was a provincial-minded scheme, which is to say that it gave the province and the zone maximum autonomy and distance from the center, in case the center was going to be dominated by the Congress, which it would be in case of a center ever being formed. And what it became in the Lahore Resolution was a religious-minded, communal-minded sort of scheme rather than a provincial-minded scheme. And so when Sikandar is later on, after the passing of this Lahore Resolution, which ruffled a lot of Sikandar's colleagues, Sikh colleagues and Hindu colleagues within the Punjab, when he's later asked about the implications of this of this resolution and his association with it and his supposed authorship of this resolution, he is in a bit of a quandary. He's taken to task in the Punjab Assembly, and his reaction is to sort of step aside and say, I have nothing to do with this. I did not come up with this. I came up with another scheme that was provincial minded. It was very different, and I don't know how it became this. I was not present at the meeting of the working committee when they decided to change my scheme into this. And he says in so many words that if this scheme relates to Pakistan, and Pakistan means an entity outside of India, I have nothing to do with this scheme at all. I did not come up with this. So this is an aspect of the Lahore Resolution, the authorship of it, and sort of the contested authorship. Who wants to take ownership of it? Who wants to take authorship for the Lahore Resolution, that we tend not to think about. The origins, where it's coming from, and for that matter, even the language that is used. The origins of those particular phrases. We ponder upon the phrases themselves, like the word state versus states, or what does it mean by units, etc. But we don't sort of look at, where those words could be coming from.
It's your turn. Do we have questions from the floor? Do we have mics down there?
جو شروع میں ڈاکٹر جعفر نے بات کی کہ لاہور ریزولوشن کچھ اور تھا, اٹ واز, اور اب آپ نے چونکہ انٹریگ کر دی ہے کہ سب کو پڑھنا چاہیے, تو انشاءاللہ ول ریڈ اٹ اینڈ ہوپفلی ول لرن سم تھنگ فرام اٹ. جو آخر میں ڈاکٹر زیدی نے بھی بات کی کہ یہ 23 مارچ ملٹرائز ہوا بعد میں, اینڈ سو فورتھ, ایگریڈ. ہم ساری چیزوں کو پازیٹیو لینے کی کوشش کرتے ہیں کہ جناح صاحب نے جو بھی کام کیا وہ بہت زبردست تھا, اور ہر طرف سے کوشش کر لی کہ پیچ اپ کر لیں سب کو. تو وائی از اٹ سو کہ ہم نے, جس طرح آپ نے بالکل ٹھیک کہا کہ واقعی اگر کانسٹیٹیوشن ہے, کانسٹیٹیوشن تو یونائٹ کرنے کے لیے ہوتا ہے, تو اس کا مطلب ہے یہ لاسٹ ڈچ ایفرٹ تھی, لاسٹ اٹیمپٹ تھی آن ہز پارٹ ٹو میک شیور تھنگس گو along. ہم نے کبھی بھی نیریٹیوز میں آج سے پہلے, کم از کم میں نے تو نہیں پڑھا یہ, کہ ہمیں یہ بتایا گیا ہو کہ یہ جو لاہور ریزولوشن ہے وہ اصل میں ایک ایفرٹ تھی ٹو پیچ اپ. اس سے پہلے بھی جناح صاحب کرتے رہے اور ان کو ہم ریکگنائز کرتے ہیں. ایسا نہیں کہ ہم کہتے ہیں جناح صاحب جس دن پالیٹکس میں آئے اس دن سے ہی وہ انہوں نے کہا تھا 2 قومیں ہیں, تو اس کا مطلب ہے پیچ اپ کو ہم ریکگنائز کرتے ہیں. تو ہم 23 مارچ 1940 کو ایز این ایفرٹ کیوں نہیں ریکگنائز کرتے؟ ڈز اٹ ناٹ سوٹ آر نیشنل نیریٹو؟ مجھے اتفاق سے اٹینڈ کرنے کا نہیں, لیکن اب پلے لسٹ میں میری ہے, میں سن رہا ہوں اس کو, وہ جو ڈوئنگ ہسٹری ان پاکستان کے اوپر ابھی ورک شاپ بڑی زبردست ہوئی تھی, اس میں ایک بڑا امپورٹنٹ سیگمنٹ تھا جس کو میں آج ہی اتفاق سے سن رہا تھا, نیشنل نیریٹیوز کے اوپر. تو کیا ہے ہمارے نیشنل نیریٹیو سے کانٹراڈکٹ کرتا ہے کہ 23 مارچ کو ہم ایسا نہ کریں, 23 مارچ کو ہم ڈویژن کے لیے رکھ لیں اور اس سے پہلے ہم پیچ اپ کی باتیں کرتے رہیں؟ تو آپ کا بڑا زبردست پوائنٹ تھا, جسٹ وانٹ سم ایلیبریشن آن دیٹ.
اوکے, تھینک یو ویری مچ. دیکھیے, نیشنل نیریٹیوز کے بارے میں بڑا صحیح کہا گیا ہے کہ نیشنل نیریٹیو بہت کچھ بھلانے کے بعد کنسٹرکٹ ہوتا ہے, اور ہم بہت کچھ بھلانے کے بعد یہ سب کچھ باتیں جو ہم سنتے ہیں اور پڑھاتے ہیں بچوں کو, وہ ہے لاہور ریزولوشن 23 کو پریزنٹ ہوئی, 24 کو ووٹنگ ہوئی اور یونینیمسلی ہو گئی. اکبر صاحب نے ابھی ذکر بھی کیا کہ there were 1 lakh people there, اور جناح صاحب نے اتنی امپورٹنٹ, بہت ہی سمجھے کہ ڈیپ روٹیڈ کانسٹیٹیوشنل باتیں اس مجمع کے سامنے کی. میرے خیال میں 1% لوگ بھی نہیں جانتے ہوں گے کہ یہ کیا کہہ رہے ہیں انگریزی میں. بلیف یہ تھا کہ جناح جو کچھ کہتے ہیں وہ صحیح کہتے ہیں. دیٹ واز ہز, ایک اس کا کریڈٹ انہیں دیجیے کہ ان کی لیڈرشپ کے اوپر اتنا بڑا ٹرسٹ ایک پوری کمیونٹی کا بن چکا تھا. لاہور ریزولوشن پاس ہو گیا, اگلے سال, اس کے اگلے سال, 1-2 سال تک مسلم لیگ نے اس کو سیلیبریٹ بھی کیا. پاکستان came into being in 1947. 1948 کے 23 مارچ کے اخبار اٹھا کے دیکھیں, کوئی سیلیبریشن نہیں ہے. 1949 کے اخبار اٹھا کے دیکھیں, کوئی سیلیبریشن نہیں ہے, کوئی نیشنل ہالیڈے نہیں ہے. 1956 کے 23 مارچ کو we were able to make our first constitution, اور وہ کانسٹیٹیوشن پروملگیٹ ہوا 23 مارچ 1957 کو. پہلی دفعہ یوم جمہوریہ سیلیبریٹ ہوا پورے پاکستان میں کہ 23 مارچ کو ہم نے آئین بنایا, پاکستان کا نام اسلامک ریپبلک آف پاکستان رکھا. 23 مارچ 1958 کو دوسری دفعہ یوم جمہوریہ بنایا گیا کہ 2 سال پہلے ہم نے جمہوری آئین بنایا. 23 مارچ 1959 جب آیا, ملک میں ماشاء اللہ لگ چکا تھا, اور وہ آئین جس نے پاکستان کو جمہوریہ بنایا تھا وہ ایبروگیٹ کیا جا چکا تھا. تو اب کیا کریں؟ بیوروکریٹس نے جا کے ایوب خان کو بتایا, سر 23 مارچ کو لاہور ریزولوشن پاس ہوا تھا, اس کو سیلیبریٹ کر لیتے ہیں. فرام دیٹ ڈے آنورڈ ہم 23 مارچ سیلیبریٹ کر رہے ہیں. دس از ہاؤ ہسٹری از یوزڈ فار پولیٹیکل پرپزز, اینڈ دیٹس وائی آئی کیپ ٹیلنگ مائی اسٹوڈنٹس کہ پلیز بیسکس کی طرف جاؤ, ڈاکومنٹ کو پڑھو. انڈیویجول واقعات جو ہیں وہ دلچسپ بھی ہو سکتے ہیں. میں جب اسٹوڈنٹ تھا تو میرا بھی شوق تھا کہ ہر جلسے میں پہنچ جاؤ, تو میں اس جلسے میں جلوس میں بھی تھا. 1987 کی بات ہے شاید. بے نظیر بھٹو آئی تھیں, تشریف لائیں, اور ایئرپورٹ سے وہ قائد اعظم کے مزار تک میرے خیال میں کوئی 10-12 گھنٹے میں پہنچی, اور ہم بھی اس جلوس میں ساتھ ساتھ تھے. اب ان کے اوپر پھول کی پتیاں ڈالی جا رہی ہیں, تو پھول کی ایک پتی ان کی اینک میں یہاں پھنس گئی. تو آصف زرداری ساتھ کھڑے تھے ٹرک کے اوپر, انہوں نے وہ پکڑ کے جب ہٹایا تو میرے ساتھ 2 لیاری کے نوجوان تھے, ان میں سے ایک نے کہا اوئے اوئے اوئے. میں نے آصف زرداری کے اس ایکٹ پہ انہوں نے پروٹیسٹ کیا یا ناراضگی کا اظہار کیا. دوسرے جو ساتھ تھے انہوں نے کہا ارے اوئے اس کا خاوند ہے. تو یہ اسے الاؤڈ ہے. بٹ دس از ایک انٹرسٹنگ واقعہ ہے. اس کی بیس کے اوپر ہم کوئی بڑی ہسٹوریکل نیریٹو نہیں بنا سکتے. تو یہ جو انڈیویجول انسیڈنٹس ہیں یہ بہت امپورٹنٹ ہوتے ہیں, لیکن ان کو کرابریٹ کرنے کی ضرورت ہے ڈاکومنٹ کے ساتھ, ان کو کرابریٹ کرنے کی ضرورت ہے دوسروں کے ورژنس کے ساتھ. تو سوللی اگر اورل سورسز پہ ڈپینڈ کریں اٹ کین بی ویری ڈسیپٹیو. اورل سورسز اس وقت امپورٹنٹ ہوتی ہیں جب آپ اس کو کرابریٹ کر رہے ہوتے ہیں دوسری سورسز کے ساتھ, اور جو ڈاکومنٹیشن ہے, جو آرکائیول مٹیریل ہے, اس کے ساتھ کرابریٹ کر رہے ہوں, تو اس سے آپ کا جو ورژن بنے گا وہ زیادہ اسٹرانگ ورژن ہوگا.
Any other questions?
Thank you. ایک ہی سوال ہے, much of it has already been covered by Dr. Jaffar, کہ یہ جو oral history ہے وہ ایک لحاظ سے ہم یہ ہسٹری ہم اس کو سمجھیں گے یا اس کو ہم میموری سمجھیں گے, اور ہسٹری اور میموری میں فرق ہے. اور کچھ لوگ یہ بھی کہتے ہیں کہ پوری ہسٹری بھی ایک کلیکٹیو میموری ہی ہے. تو اس کو اور سوفسٹیکیٹڈ طریقے سے دیکھنے کی ضرورت ہے. اور یہ بھی ہے کہ سٹیزنز آرکائیو آف پاکستان اٹس ناٹ جسٹ اوکے ایک جغرافیکل اس کا ہے, چلو کہ یہ پاکستان میں سے ہم آرکائیو کر رہے ہیں, لیکن کیا اس کا یہ بھی ایک امپلس ہے کہ یہ نیشنلسٹ پروجیکٹ کو یہ سپورٹ کرے گا اس لحاظ سے, کیونکہ اگر ہم بھارت ایک کھوج دیکھیں جو شام بنیگل نے بنائی تھی ایک سیریز دوردرشن کے لیے ہسٹری کی, اس میں سیپریٹزم کا ایک پورا ایک ایپیسوڈ ہے. اس میں جہاں تک مجھے یاد پڑا ہے شاید یہ 1940 کی ایپیسوڈ نے ایک فکشنلائز دکھایا ہوا ہے کہ ایک مسلمان کپل بیٹھے ہیں اور وہ کہہ رہی ہے عورت, وہ بتا رہا ہے کہ آپ کو پتہ ہے کہ یہ بات کر دی لاہور میں کتنی ڈینجرس بات ہے, اس سے کتنا اثر پڑے گا, یہاں مسلمان برباد ہو جائیں گے ایسی بات سے. تو وہ عورت کہہ رہی کہ نہیں آپ کیا کہہ رہے ہیں, ایسے نہیں ہو سکتا. تو وہ والا جو انڈیا کے بھی جو وہاں پر بھی جو لوگ ہیں, اگر ہم ان کی بھی اگر یہ اس قسم کی اگر ہم آرکائیو کلیکٹ کریں کہ 1940 کے بارے میں ان کی کیا یاد ہے, کیونکہ کچھ چیزیں ہم یہاں پہ کمفرٹیبل ہیں کہنے کی اور کچھ چیزیں وہ وہاں پہ ہیں کمفرٹیبل کہنے کی. اور جیسے ڈاکٹر جعفر نے کہا کہ نیشنل نیریٹو بھی بہت کچھ بھلانے کے بعد بنتا ہے, اس طرح اپنی میموری بھی جو ہے کئی چیزیں جو ہیں فوکس میں آ جاتی ہیں, بھلا جاتی ہیں. نیشنل نیریٹو از کمپلیٹلی افیکٹنگ اٹ. سو وی آر ناٹ گوئنگ بیک ان ٹائم, وی آر ناٹ, وی جسٹ ریفلیکٹنگ آن سم ونز view of that time, but it's not taking us directly there. Thank you. It's more of a comment. Yeah.
Is there one or two more questions? We could take them together. Yes, student at the back.
Question is, considering the debates nowadays regarding the two-nation theory and the partition that took place, and the question is that considering the current situation of Pakistan, India and Bangladesh nowadays, was partition the best solution out there at that time?
I think both maybe Dr. Zaidi and Dr. Jaffar should take that one. Yeah. Yes. آپ پہلے لیں.
اوکے جی, جہاں تک مجھ تک آپ کی آواز پہنچی کہ ٹو نیشن تھیوری اینڈ پارٹیشن واز دیٹ ریزنیبل بیسٹ سولوشن ایٹ دیٹ ٹائم, مجھے ایسا لگتا ہے کہ یس, ریلیجن کی بیس پہ نیشن بنتی ہے نہیں بنتی, اور نیشن ہوڈ کیا ہوتی ہے ان دا کانٹیکسٹ آف انڈیا, مسلم نیشن, دا نوشن آف مسلم نیشن ہوڈ, بہت سارے سوال اس کے اوپر اٹھتے ہیں. اگر مسلمان ایک قوم ہیں تو کیا اس قوم کے اندر ایران کے مسلمان بھی شامل تھے, افغانستان کے بھی شامل تھے. انفیکٹ گاندھی نے, دا فیمس گاندھی جنا کرسپونڈنس, گاندھی نے تو پوائنٹڈ سوال کیا جنا صاحب سے کہ بھائی جس مسلم نیشن کی آپ بات کر رہے ہیں اس میں جو دوسرے ملکوں کے اندر مسلمان ہیں وہ بھی اس کا حصہ ہیں کہ نہیں. انہوں نے سیدھا کہا کہ نہیں, وی آر ٹاکنگ اباؤٹ انڈیا, انڈین مسلمز جو ہیں وہ ایک نیشن ہے. تو بالکل یعنی نیشن ہوڈ کے بارے میں آپ یہ پڑھیں گے کہ اس کے اندر باؤنڈریز ڈرا کی جاتی ہیں, انکلوژن اور ایکسکلوژن ہوتا ہے, اور کون نیشن میں شامل ہے کون نیشن میں شامل نہیں ہے, اور یہ اچھا خاصا آربیٹریری ارینجمنٹ ہوتا ہے. ٹھیک ہے, تو یہ ہمارے مسلم نیشن ہوڈ کے ساتھ بھی تھا, اور اس وقت ایسا لگ رہا تھا کہ ایون ان دا گیون کانٹیسٹ ان یونائٹیڈ انڈیا, a community believed, or the leadership of a community believed, that if we invoke the notion of nationhood for us, then we will be in a position to get a better deal in the political and constitutional arrangement of the country. As soon as that country was achieved, 15 اگست کو سب بھول گئے ٹو نیشن تھیوری کو, اور بنگالی بنگالی بن گئے, پنجابی پنجابی بن گئے, سندھی سندھی بن گئے, because the context has changed, and in the new context it was their ethnic identities which became important, اور بالکل جسٹیفائڈ تھا کہ جی ہم بنگالی ہیں, ہمیں آبادی کی بنیاد پہ نمائندگی دو, ہم سندھی ہیں, ہمیں آبادی کی بنیاد پہ نمائندگی دو, so on and so forth. تو یہ پورا جو نیشن ہوڈ کا انسٹیٹیوشن ہے, اس کو آپ کوئی فکسڈ چیز نہ سمجھیں. اٹس ناٹ اے پرائموریل ٹائپ آف تھنگ, یہ ایک بالکل فنکشنلسٹ ارینجمنٹ ہوتا ہے. اس کے اندر ایک وقت پہ کون سا نوشن آپ کو سپورٹ کرتا ہے, کون سا نہیں کرتا. میں اور اکبر جب انگلینڈ میں ہوتے ہیں تو ہمیں اپنا مسلمان ہونا اور اپنا پاکستانی ہونا اور کراچی آئٹ ہونا وہ ریلیونٹ نہیں لگ رہا ہوتا. بعض کانٹیسٹ ایسے ہوتے ہیں جس میں ہمیں اپنا ساؤتھ ایشین ہونا امپورٹنٹ لگتا ہے, اور وی آل بیکم ساؤتھ ایشین. میں نے ساؤتھ ہال میں ایک دفعہ دیکھا کہ ایک اسکول کے باہر ہنگامہ ہو رہا تھا, تو میں جن صاحب کے مہمان تھا ان سے میں نے پوچھا یہ کیا ہو رہا ہے, تو کہنے لگے کہ ایک گورے نے ایک ساؤتھ ایشین لڑکی کو چھیڑا ہے, تو آج سارے ساؤتھ ایشین لڑکے جو ہیں وہ ہاکیاں لے کے آئے ہوئے ہیں اس گورے کو مارنے کے لیے. تو اس میں سکھ بھی تھے, ہندو بھی تھے, پاکستانی بھی تھے. سو اندر اینٹیٹی ساؤتھ ایشین کی بن گئی. ادھر کوئی نہیں سوچ رہا تھا کہ ہم پاکستانی ہیں یا ہم سکھ ہیں یا ہم ہندو ہیں. تو ان اے چینج انوائرمنٹ people decide which identity should be invoked for achieving our political purpose.
Would you like to add something? No? Any other questions? We're almost out of time. 2:30, there's another class in here. Yes, we've got one.
Thank you very much. Just a small comments I would like to make. It's been very interesting discussion. جو نیشن ہوڈ کی بات ہو رہی ہے اور کانٹرڈکشنس کی بات ہو رہی ہے, آئی ایم فرام انٹرنیشنل ریلیشنس بیک گراؤنڈ, اور ہم یہ دیکھتے ہیں کہ ہر وقت کی ایک ووکیبلری ہوتی ہے جو کسی موومنٹ میں استعمال ہو رہی ہوتی ہے. تو دیٹ از اندر ڈائمینشن دیٹ وی یوز. اب جب نیشن کا کانسیپٹ ہے یا نیشن اسٹیٹ کا کانسیپٹ ہے وہ یورپ کے کانٹیننٹ پہ بنا ہے, اور یہ جو پیریڈ ہے جب لاہور ڈکلیریشن دی گئی ہے تو بہت سی سچویشنز کا امپیکٹ ہے, جیسے ورلڈ وار 2 ختم ہونے والی ہے اور اب پتہ ہے کہ برٹن یہاں سے جا رہا ہے. تو جو کانسٹیٹیوشنل ڈبیٹ ہے اس کی لینگویج بھی اسی طرح سے استعمال کی گئی ہے. یہ ایک بالکل الگ ڈبیٹ ہے. جو انہوں نے بات کی تھی وہ بہت اچھا کامنٹ تھا کہ جب ہم نیشنل نیریٹو ڈیولپ کرنے کی کوشش کر رہے ہیں تو اس میں بہت سارے کانٹرڈکشنز ہیں. جب ہم کلاس رومس میں جاتے ہیں ہسٹری پڑھانے کے لیے اور ہسٹری کو ہسٹری کے ایسپیکٹس کے ساتھ انالائز کرتے ہیں تو ہمیں بچوں کے ساتھ کنیکٹ کرنے میں بہت مشکل ہوتی ہے. اس لیے کہ آپ یہ دیکھیے, مجھے شاید یہ لگتا ہے کہ جو ہمارے ملک میں اتنے کانٹرڈکشنز ہیں اس کی بھی ایک بہت بڑی وجہ یہی ہے کہ ہسٹری کی کلاسز میں کتنے لوگ آتے ہیں, تو جو ڈسکورس اوور دا پیریڈ آف ٹائم ہم یہاں سمجھنے کی کوشش کر رہے ہیں اس کا بھی نیشن کے ساتھ کوئی تعلق نہیں ہے, اور وہ بہت زیادہ ایک کنفیوژن کریٹ کر رہا ہے. تو ایک سوال بھی یہ ذہن میں اٹھتا ہے کہ ہم کیا کردار ادا کر سکتے ہیں جو اس گیپ کو فل کریں. تو اگر آپ اس کو کامنٹ کر دیں تھوڑا سا تو بہت اچھا ہوگا. بہت شکریہ.
اچھا, وہ اکبر صاحب مشکل سوال میری طرف بھیج رہے ہیں, تو نہیں, اٹس اے ویری گڈ کویسچن, بالکل ریلیونٹ بات ہے. میرا خیال یہ ہے کہ ایز اے نیشن وی شوڈ اسٹڈی ہسٹری, اور ہمیں ہسٹری کو زیادہ سے زیادہ پڑھانا چاہیے وداؤٹ امپوزنگ اینی پرٹیکولر ورژن. یہ جو آفیشیل ہسٹوریوگرافی ہے اس نے ہمارے ذہنوں کو بھی خراب کیا, اور ہمارا تاریخ کا جو ذوق ہو سکتا تھا اس کو بالکل مسمار کر دیا ہے. آپ بچوں کو الاؤ کریں, وہ سوال کریں, آپ ان کو سورسز بتائیں, وہ سورسز پہ خود جائیں, وہ نہ دیکھیں کہ ڈاکٹر جعفر کیا کہہ رہی ہیں اور ڈاکٹر عالیہ کیا کہہ رہی ہیں, وہ اپنے نتیجوں پہ خود پہنچیں. تو یہ وہ کلچر ہے جو ہونا چاہیے. اب پاکستان میں صورتحال یہ کہ ہسٹری کے سبجیکٹ کو انہوں نے 1960s میں پہلے تو مرج کر دیا سوشل اسٹڈیز کے اندر, پھر جو تھوڑی بہت ہسٹری یونیورسٹیوں میں بچ گئی اس میں انہوں نے بائیفرکیٹ کیا اور اسلامک ہسٹری ڈپارٹمنٹ الگ کر دیے اور جنرل ہسٹری ڈپارٹمنٹ الگ کر دیے. نتیجہ یہ ہے کہ آج جنرل ہسٹری کراچی یونیورسٹی میں پڑھائی جاتی ہے, لیکن کراچی کے کوئی 250 کالجوں میں سے مشکل سے 3 کالجوں میں ہسٹری پڑھائی جاتی ہے, اور ٹوٹل ہسٹری کے لیکچررز مجھے بتایا کسی نے 4 لیکچرر ہیں کراچی کے اندر. دس از واٹ وی ڈو ود ہسٹری. ہاں اسلامک ہسٹری پڑھ رہے ہیں, اب وہ بھی پڑھیں, مطلب آئی ایم ناٹ اگینسٹ اٹ, لیکن آپ ہسٹری کو اگر کمپارٹمنٹلائز اس طرح سے کریں گے اور وہ بھی اس طرح جیسے ہمارا ہوا ہے, تو پھر کوئی یورپین ہسٹری کیوں پڑھ رہا ہوگا اور وہ ساؤتھ ایشین ہسٹری کیوں پڑھ رہا ہوگا اور ہسٹری سے نتائج کیوں اخذ کر رہا ہوگا. تو یہ ہول سیٹ آف ایشوز ہیں جن کو ایڈریس کرنے کی ضرورت ہے.
I think that's a great note to wrap up on. Thank you to all our speakers. And thank you also to the Citizens Archive of Pakistan for sharing their wonderful material with us.